The CEO married a poor girl to prove money solves everything, until she proved him wrong. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the streets of London into mirrors of gold and gray. Inside a quiet cafe near Regent Street, Adrian Valmont, the 33-year-old CEO of Valmont & Company, stirred his espresso without looking up. His reflection shimmered in the brass light, sharp suit, steady eyes, and the faint arrogance of a man who had never been told no. Across from him sat Isabelle Moreau, a young woman whose life could not have been more different. Her coat was still damp from the rain, her hands clasped tightly around a chipped mug of tea. She looked like someone holding on to her last thread of hope. Adrian spoke first, his voice calm, controlled. "Marry me," he said. "Think of it as a contract." The words hung between them, absurd and heavy. Isabelle blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "A contract?" she repeated softly. He leaned back, watching her with the faintest smile. "You need money. I need a wife for 6 months to finalize an international merger. We both get what we want." The warmth from the cafe suddenly felt suffocating. Isabelle had spent the last few weeks searching for work, for any chance to pay her mother's hospital bills. She had painted until her fingers cramped, sold sketches in the market, and still, it was never enough. Now, this man, this stranger, in an immaculate suit, was offering her salvation wrapped in humiliation. "Why me?" she finally asked. Adrian's eyes flickered, golden under the light. "Because you are ordinary," he said, "and ordinary is believable." A flash of pain crossed her face, but she masked it quickly. "You really think money solves everything, do you?" He gave a short laugh. "It usually does." Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Isabelle stared at the raindrops sliding down the glass, each one catching the reflection of the cafe's warm champagne lights. She thought of her mother's frail smile, of the hospital calling that morning, of the unpaid invoices stacked on her kitchen table. When she looked back at Adrian, her decision had already been made. "All right," she said quietly, "I will do it." Adrian nodded once, satisfied, as if closing another business deal. "Good. The contract will be ready tomorrow morning. My lawyer will send the details." But as he stood to leave, something in her tone made him pause. "This is just business, Mr. Valmont," Isabelle added. "Do not mistake my desperation for admiration." He turned toward her, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his practiced indifference. For the first time, he noticed how steady her voice was, how she refused to look away. Adrian smiled faintly. "Then we understand each other perfectly." She watched him walk out into the rain, his umbrella cutting through the golden mist. For a long moment, Isabelle sat still, her heart trembling with a strange mixture of relief and dread. She had just agreed to marry a man who did not believe in love, only in power. And yet, somewhere deep down, a quiet voice whispered that this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The next morning, the city of London woke beneath a veil of mist. Isabelle walked along the wet pavement, her worn shoes brushing puddles that reflected the pale gold of the early Sunday. Her coat was still damp from the night before, her hair pulled into a loose braid that framed a face far too young for the exhaustion it carried. The cafe meeting replayed in her mind like a strange dream. The words, "Marry me, think of it as a contract," echoed each time she blinked. She could still see Adrian Valmont's calm expression, the way he had said it as if proposing a business merger instead of a life-changing decision. By the time she reached the small apartment she rented above a bakery, the air smelled of bread and rain. Inside, the room was barely large enough for a bed, a small easel, and a shelf stacked with art supplies. Canvases leaned against the wall, half-finished portraits of women with tired eyes and faint smiles. They looked like her. Her phone vibrated. A new message. From St. Mary's Hospital. Subject: urgent. Outstanding balance. She closed her eyes, pressing the phone to her chest. Her mother's treatment could not wait another week. The last payment had cleared out what little savings she had. She had already sold most of her paintings, even her grandmother's silver locket. Her roommate, Clara, knocked softly on the door. "Any luck with the job interview?" Isabelle forced a smile. "They said they would call." Clara sighed. "You cannot keep doing this forever. You need something stable." Stable. The word felt like a cruel joke. Stability belonged to people who had choices. When Clara left, Isabelle sat at her desk and opened her sketchbook. Inside were pages of sketches, street scenes, flowers from Hyde Park, her mother's hands holding a cup of tea. She turned to a blank page and began to draw. The lines trembled at first, then steadied. She drew a pair of eyes, cold, golden, unreadable. Adrian Valmont. Her phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Moreau, this is Richard, Mr. Valmont's legal assistant. The contract is ready for your review. He asked that you come to the Valmont building at 4 o'clock. Her breath caught. "Today?" "Yes, today. And Miss Moreau, please bring identification." After the call ended, she sat motionless for several minutes. The rain outside had stopped, but the clouds hung low over the city like a warning. She looked around her small apartment, at the cracked window pane, the unpaid bills taped to the wall. The hospital notice still glowing on her phone screen. Maybe this was madness. Maybe it was survival. Either way, she had run out of options. At 3:45, she stood before the towering glass doors of Valmont and Company. The lobby shimmered in warm champagne light, marble floors polished to a mirror finish. She caught her reflection, plain blouse, faded jeans, nervous eyes, and almost turned back. Then she remembered her mother's smile from their last video call. "Do not give up, Isabelle," her mother had said. "You are stronger than you think." She stepped inside. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening slightly, as if surprised to see someone like her in this place. "Miss Moreau, Mr. Valmont is expecting you." The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor number glowed softly as it passed, until she reached the top. When the doors opened, Adrian was there, standing by the window with the skyline behind him. He turned as she entered. "You came." Her voice was steady. "You asked for me." He gestured toward a folder on the table. "Here is our agreement. Read it carefully." She opened it, her eyes scanning the words. 6 months, non-disclosure, public appearances, compensation upon completion. "This is your solution," he said quietly. "New risk, new emotion, just a transaction." Isabelle looked up at him, her fingers tightening on the paper. "You are wrong, Mr. Valmont," she said softly. "There is always emotion. Even in a transaction." He said nothing, but something in his expression shifted just slightly, enough to make her wonder if behind that flawless facade, there was a man who might one day feel something real. The contract signing took place the following afternoon in Adrian's corner office, 30 floors above the London skyline. The view stretched endlessly, clouds rolling past like slow ships. Isabelle stood near the window, her reflection pale against the glass. On the polished desk between them lay a folder embossed with the Valmont insignia, a silver pen resting beside it. Adrian gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please, sit." She obeyed, though her stomach twisted. Every part of her wanted to run, yet every reason she could not echoed louder. Her mother, the bills, the quiet fear of losing everything. He spoke in the same measured tone he used for business. "There are 5 clauses. You should read them carefully." He handed her the pages. The words looked sharp, printed in perfect lines. Clause 1. No emotional involvement. Clause 2. Public appearances as required by Mr. Valmont. Clause 3. Confidentiality must be maintained at all times. Clause 4. No interference in company affairs. Clause 5. Termination after 6 months, with agreed compensation. Adrian leaned back, his gaze unreadable. Simple, is it not? This arrangement benefits us both. Isabelle looked up from the paper. "You really believe everything can be written down, signed, and sealed, like a deal?" "That is how the world works," he replied. "Feelings only complicate what should be simple." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the city below. Then Isabelle reached for the pen. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes did not waver. "If I sign this," she said quietly, "it will not make me like you, Mr. Valmont." Adrian smiled faintly. "I am not asking you to." She signed her name with careful strokes. The sound of the pen scratching the paper felt final, like a door closing behind her. Adrian added his signature beside hers, his handwriting bold and precise. When it was done, he stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the arrangement." She hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, his skin warm against hers. The moment lasted a fraction too long before she pulled away. Richard, the assistant, entered with a neutral smile. "Everything is in order, sir. I will process the documents immediately." "Thank you," Adrian said. "Make sure Miss Moreau receives the first installment by tomorrow morning." As the assistant left, Isabelle gathered her coat. "Is that all?" "For now," Adrian said. "You will move into my residence this weekend. There will be fittings, etiquette lessons, and public events to attend. My image is precise, Miss Moreau. I expect the same from my wife." The word wife sounded strange, heavy, unreal. She forced a breath. "Understood." Adrian studied her for a moment longer, as if testing her resolve. "You surprise me. Most people hesitate before trading their freedom for security." She met his gaze. "Most people do not have a dying mother." The silence that followed was heavier than any contract. For a second, the polished mask on Adrian's face cracked just slightly. Then he straightened, his tone cool again. "You may go. My driver will pick you up Saturday morning." Isabelle turned toward the door. "One more thing, Mr. Valmont." He looked up. "If money truly solves everything," she said, "then you must be the happiest man alive." She left before he could answer. The echo of her footsteps faded down the marble hall, leaving Adrian alone with the signed agreement. He looked down at the paper, at the delicate curve of her signature beside his own, and for reasons he could not name, the victory felt strangely hollow. Outside, the clouds parted. A line of sunlight struck the glass, turning the office gold. Adrian closed the folder, unaware that the deal he had just sealed would soon rewrite everything he believed about power, control, and love. 2 days later, the rain had stopped, and the Valmont estate gleamed beneath the morning Sunday. The mansion stood at the edge of the city like a museum of glass and marble, its long windows catching the gold light that poured across the manicured gardens. Isabelle stepped out of the black car that had brought her there, her small suitcase clutched tightly in both hands. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished stone. She had expected grandeur, but not this. The place looked more like a palace than a home. For a moment, she hesitated at the base of the steps, until the door opened and a woman in a navy uniform appeared. "Good morning, Miss Moreau. I am Mrs. Harlow, the housekeeper. Mr. Valmont is expecting you." "Oh." Isabelle followed her inside. The floors shone like mirrors, the walls lined with art she had only seen in magazines. Each step echoed through the vast hallway, reminding her just how small she was in this world. Mrs. Harlow led her to a dressing room where 2 assistants waited beside racks of designer gowns. "The stylist will prepare you for your first appearance," the housekeeper explained. "There is a dinner event tomorrow evening. You will accompany Mr. Valmont." "Oh," Isabelle looked at the silk dresses shimmering in shades of champagne and gold. "I do not belong in these," she murmured. Mrs. Harlow's tone softened. "No one belongs anywhere at first, dear, but you will learn." Hours later, after fittings, makeup trials, and etiquette lessons, Isabelle sat before a mirror under warm light. The woman staring back at her hardly looked like herself. Her hair was elegantly swept, her lips painted a delicate rose. The faded jeans and paint-stained shirts of her old life were gone, replaced by satin and glass. She should have felt powerful. Instead, she felt like a painting, beautiful, still, and not alive. That evening, she met Adrian in the main hall. He wore a black tuxedo, crisp and immaculate. For a moment he paused, his eyes moving from her face to the gown. "You clean up well," he said. She gave a faint smile. "You make it sound like I was a mess before." Adrian's mouth curved slightly, just unpolished. They practiced their entrance, walking side by side down the grand staircase as cameras would flash. He corrected her posture, the tilt of her chin, the way her hand rested on his arm. "Confidence," he said quietly. People can smell fear. I am not afraid, she replied, her tone calm but firm. He glanced at her. Good. Then you will survive this world. The next day came quickly. The Valmont car glided through the city toward the gala hall. The building glittered with chandeliers and champagne laughter. As they entered, all eyes turned toward them. Whispers floated through the crowd. Who was she? Where did she come from? How had she caught his attention? Adrian guided her through the throng of executives and socialites. Remember, he whispered, smile, answer politely, and never show doubt. At the table, a woman leaned close with a curious smile. You must be the new Mrs. Valmont. Tell me, dear, what do you do? Isabelle held the woman's gaze. I paint, she said simply. Paint? The woman repeated, amused. How charming. Adrian was about to interject, but Isabelle continued. It may not earn millions, but it keeps me honest. The woman blinked, unsure how to respond. Around them, a few guests chuckled approvingly. Adrian looked at Isabelle, something like pride flickering behind his calm expression. When the evening ended, the car ride home was silent until Adrian spoke. You handled yourself well. Thank you, she said. It was only dinner. Not for everyone, he murmured. You faced a room that wanted to see you fail. She turned to look at him. Then I hope I disappointed them. For the first time, Adrian laughed, a low, genuine sound that startled even him. Isabelle leaned back against the seat, watching the city lights glide past. For a brief moment, the contract between them felt less like a cage and more like a bridge. Neither of them had expected to cross. The following week unfolded like a series of carefully staged performances. Every morning, Isabelle woke before sunrise to the sound of the fountain outside her window. She ate breakfast in silence, surrounded by marble and gold, then met with the etiquette tutor who corrected every gesture, every word, every breath that did not fit the image of Mrs. Valmont. Adrian rarely joined her during the day. He spent his hours in meetings, phone calls, and endless negotiations. Yet each evening, their paths crossed at some public event, an art gala, a charity auction, or a corporate dinner where every glance carried meaning. Isabelle learned to smile when expected, to nod at the right time, to glide through rooms filled with people who admired her dress but not her presence. The next major test arrived on a Friday evening, at the annual Valmont Foundation Gala. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, every surface reflecting gold and ivory. Isabelle stood beside Adrian, as photographers called their names. The flashbulbs burned like tiny stars, and for a moment she almost forgot to breathe. When the speeches began, Adrian moved among investors and board members, leaving her to navigate the crowd alone. She caught fragments of conversation stocks, mergers, luxury vacations, topics that felt like a foreign language. Then a voice, sharp and smooth, cut through the noise. So, you are the artist, a man said. He was tall, older, with a champagne flute balanced elegantly in his hand. Tell me, Mrs. Valmont, what inspired a woman like you to marry a man like Adrian? The question hung in the air, laced with amusement. Isabelle felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. She smiled gently, steadying her voice. Inspiration can come from many places. For me, it was the chance to paint something real. Laughter rippled through the crowd, unsure whether it was a joke or a challenge. The man raised an eyebrow. And what is real about him? She took a sip of water before answering. The part that everyone overlooks, his humanity. A murmur spread. Adrian had returned just in time to hear her words. His expression softened for a fraction of a second before the familiar calm returned. He placed a hand lightly at the small of her back. Excuse us, he said smoothly, guiding her away. In the quiet of the hallway, he turned to her. That was bold. Did I embarrass you? She asked. He shook his head. No, you reminded them that I am still human. Most of them forget. They stood there for a moment, the muffled music echoing through the doors. Isabelle glanced up at him. Do you forget too? Adrian hesitated. Sometimes. The car ride home was silent, the kind of silence that carried unspoken thoughts. When they reached the estate, Isabelle stepped out first, the hem of her gown brushing the stone path. She stopped beneath the lantern light and turned to him. Tonight, you did not correct me, she said. Because you were right, he replied quietly. And I was proud. For a moment, she saw something different in his eyes, not the sharp control of a businessman, but a trace of warmth, almost fragile. Then he looked away, breaking the spell. "Good night, Isabelle," he said, his tone formal again. "Good night, Mr. Valmont." She walked up the steps, her heels clicking softly against the marble. Behind her, the car engine started, fading into the distance. Inside her chest, something strange stirred a feeling she did not want to name. That night, as she removed her jewelry and wiped away the layers of makeup, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman in the glass looked elegant, composed, untouchable. But beneath the surface, her heart was no longer still. She whispered to the empty room. This was supposed to be pretend. Outside, the wind rustled through the roses. Somewhere in the mansion below, Adrian paused by his office window, staring out at the same night sky. For reasons he could not explain, he smiled just once before turning off the light. The following days passed more quietly, as if the air inside the mansion itself had softened. The tension that had once filled every room was fading, replaced by something warmer, unspoken, and fragile. Adrian still spent long hours at his office downtown, yet whenever he returned home, his first words were no longer orders or instructions. One evening, Isabelle found him in the study surrounded by half-open folders and a glass of untouched scotch. The glow from the desk lamp cast a gentle gold hue across his face. For a moment she hesitated at the doorway, uncertain if she should speak. "You are still working?" she asked. Adrian looked up, surprised. "Old habits. Deadlines do not rest." She smiled faintly. "Neither do you." He gestured toward the empty chair. "Sit. Unless you are afraid of numbers and balance sheets." "Oh, I am only afraid of people who think those are the only things that matter," she said, moving closer. He gave a small laugh. It was the kind of sound that carried exhaustion, not arrogance. "You are not what I expected, Isabelle. And what did you expect? A woman who would take the money and stay silent." "Then you made a poor investment," she said softly. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "Perhaps it is the first good mistake I have made in years." The silence that followed was no longer uncomfortable. She noticed the tired lines near his eyes, the way his hands lingered on the edge of the papers as if searching for stability. Something inside her shifted. He was no longer just a symbol of wealth and control. He was a man who had forgotten what it meant to rest. Later that night, after he had gone to his room, Isabelle wandered through the gallery hall of the estate. The paintings were old, most depicting scenes of triumph and legacy. But one caught her attention, a portrait of a woman holding a small boy near a lake. The plaque read, "Eleanor Valmont, 1989. Mrs. Harlow, the housekeeper, approached quietly. That was his mother. She passed away when he was 12. He has never spoken of her since. Isabelle stared at the painting. "She looks kind." "She was," Mrs. Harlow replied. "The house was different then, warmer. After she died, the boy grew into a man who believed love made people weak." When Isabelle returned to her room, she could not stop thinking about the photograph. The next morning, she found Adrian in the garden with a cup of coffee, staring at the fountain. The sunlight caught the edge of his cufflinks, turning them into small sparks of gold. "You look like someone remembering something," she said. He smiled without turning. "Maybe I am." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she asked softly, "Do you ever miss her?" He turned his gaze toward her. "Every day, but missing her taught me something." "What is that?" "That the more you love, the more you lose." She stepped closer. "Or maybe the more you love, the more you live." The words hung between them. He studied her face, the sincerity in her eyes, the quiet courage that had begun to disarm him. For the first time in years, Adrian Valmont felt something he could not quantify or control. When she finally walked away, he remained there beneath the morning sun, the taste of her words lingering like the faint sweetness of champagne. For a man who had always measured life in profit and success, he found himself thinking of something far rarer: peace. That night, before sleep claimed him, he remembered her voice and wondered if perhaps love was not weakness at all, but the one thing strong enough to make him human again. The change between them did not go unnoticed. Within weeks, the Valmont household carried a different rhythm. The staff whispered about how the usually distant Mr. Valmont had started smiling more often, how he now lingered in the breakfast room instead of vanishing behind his office door. Isabelle had become the quiet pulse of the mansion, steady, thoughtful, and impossibly real. But peace rarely lasts long in a world built on appearances. On a Tuesday morning, Adrian's assistant, Richard, entered his office, holding a newspaper. The bold headline screamed across the front page, "The CEO's Fake Bride, Inside the Valmont Arrangement." Beneath it was a photograph of Isabelle, taken at the gala, her smile bright and unguarded. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Who leaked this?" Richard hesitated. "It came from someone inside the company, possibly a board member." "Find out who," Adrian said coldly. By noon, the scandal had reached every corner of the city. News channels replayed the same image. Gossip blogs spun endless theories. The story painted Isabelle as a gold digger, a poor artist who had sold herself for luxury. It even mentioned her mother's illness, twisting compassion into scandal. When Isabelle saw the headlines, her hands shook. The calls from unknown numbers did not stop. Reporters camped outside the gates, their cameras flashing like lightning. She tried to stay calm, but when she found Adrian in his office, surrounded by his legal team, her composure cracked. "Why are they saying these things?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did you tell them about the contract?" Adrian looked up from his desk, his face expressionless. "Damage control requires transparency." "Transparency?" she repeated in disbelief. "You mean betrayal." He stood, his tone sharp. "Do you think I enjoy this? I am protecting my company, Isabelle. Everything I built is at risk." She stepped back, shaking her head. "And what about me? My name, my dignity, do those count for anything?" He did not answer. The silence was enough. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I thought you had changed," she said quietly. "But you are still the man who believes money fixes everything." Without another word, she turned and walked out. That evening, Adrian held a press conference. Cameras filled the hall, flashing endlessly. When a reporter asked if his marriage was real, he hesitated just long enough for the pause to speak louder than any denial. "It was an arrangement," he said finally. "But it was my decision. She is not to blame." The room erupted in questions, but Isabelle, watching from her apartment downtown, heard only one thing, his confirmation that their marriage had never been real. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the window. She sat alone at her small table, surrounded by her old sketches, the life she had left behind, now her only refuge. The phone buzzed with his calls, but she did not answer. In the empty mansion, Adrian stood before the same portrait of his mother that Isabelle had once admired. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of regret. He thought of her words, "The more you love, the more you live." That night, the house felt colder than ever. The rooms that once glowed with warm champagne light now seemed drenched in gray. He poured himself a drink he did not taste, staring out at the rain-soaked garden. He had won every deal in his life through control, calculation, and pride. But with one careless decision, he had lost the only person who had seen him as human. And for the first time, Adrian Valmont realized that no amount of wealth could buy back the silence of someone who once believed in him. 3 months passed. The city had moved on to new headlines, new scandals, and new stories, but Adrian Valmont had not. The mansion that once overflowed with noise and light had turned into a hollow monument of silence. He worked late, stayed longer at the office, and stopped attending social events altogether. Even Richard had begun to worry. One afternoon, Adrian sat in his office, staring at a painting on the wall, a landscape Isabelle had given him months ago. He had dismissed it at the time as sentimental, but now he saw details he had never noticed before. The brushstrokes were soft yet deliberate, the light golden, warm, and alive. It was the exact opposite of everything he had built his life upon. That same day, Richard entered quietly. "Sir, there is something you should see." He handed Adrian an invitation. The card was simple, hand-pressed, and cream-colored. At the bottom, written in graceful script, were the words, "The Art of Isabelle Moreau, a private exhibition." Adrian's heart stopped for a moment. The event was in Rome, opening that weekend. That night, he stood in the empty hallway of his home, looking at the portrait of his mother once more. Her painted eyes seemed to ask him the question he had avoided for months. "What are you waiting for?" By sunrise, Adrian was on a flight to Italy. When he arrived at the gallery in Rome, The sun had already dipped low, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. People in elegant attire filled the marble foyer. The air carried the scent of fresh paint, perfume, and quiet admiration. He moved slowly through the crowd until he saw her. Isabelle stood near the center of the hall, surrounded by journalists and patrons. She wore a simple white dress, her hair tied back loosely. She looked confident, radiant, free. For a long moment, he could only watch. Then his eyes caught the title of the painting displayed behind her, The Golden Cage. The painting showed a man standing inside a cage made of light. His face was calm, but his eyes were empty, staring at a world he could not touch. The use of gold and shadow was unmistakable. It was him. When the crowd shifted, Isabelle noticed him. The brief flicker of surprise in her eyes was quickly replaced by composure. She nodded politely, then turned to greet another guest. Adrian waited until the event began to thin. Then he approached her. "Your work is extraordinary," he said softly. She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "I'm glad you think so, Mr. Valmont. You can drop the formality," he said. "I did not come here as your employer. I came to apologize." She folded her arms gently. "You already did that, in front of the entire world." "Not like this," he said. "That was for the cameras. This is for you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was the original marriage contract. "I came to end this properly." She glanced at the paper, then back at him. "It already ended, Adrian." "I know," he said quietly. "But I also wanted to tell you that the contract was the worst decision I ever made and meeting you was the best." For the first time, her eyes softened. "Do you know why I called that painting The Golden Cage?" He shook his head. "Because sometimes people build walls of gold around themselves and mistake it for safety. You lived inside one your entire life." He looked at her, humbled. "And you broke it." The noise of the gallery faded around them. Isabelle took a deep breath. "I do not hate you, Adrian. I just hope you learn to live outside of it." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I already have." Before he could say more, a young collector called her name. She turned away to greet them, leaving him standing there among her art. As he looked once more at the golden cage, Adrian realized the truth redemption was not about winning her back. It was about becoming the man she had believed he could be. When he left the gallery that night, the Roman air was cool and sweet, the city lights reflecting like liquid gold on the cobblestones. For the first time in years, Adrian Valmont felt something genuine, a peace he had not bought, but earned. A full year passed before their paths crossed again. Adrian had rebuilt his life quietly, far from the flash of cameras and boardroom headlines. He stepped down from several public roles and devoted his time to a new project, one inspired by a single promise he had made to himself the night he left Rome to live, not just to win. The Valmont Foundation reopened under a new mission, funding small art programs and community studios across Europe. The first of these was in Paris, a modest gallery near the river, painted in soft shades of champagne and ivory. It was called L'Atelier Lumière, meaning the Studio of Light. The opening evening was simple, filled with laughter and soft piano music. Children painted at small easels near the windows while guests admired their work. Adrian stood quietly near the entrance, watching as the world moved in color again. For the first time, he felt present. When the last of the guests began to leave, he noticed her. Isabelle stepped through the doorway, the same calm strength in her eyes, though time had deepened her grace. She wore a pale gold dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, neither spoke. "I heard about what you have done," she said softly. "The foundation, the galleries, they are beautiful." He smiled gently. "They are yours too. It was your courage that began all this." She glanced around the room at the paintings lining the walls. "You turned your cage into light." "I learned from the best teacher," he replied. They walked slowly through the studio, stopping in front of a framed sketch, the first one Isabelle had ever sold. Beneath it was a small brass plaque engraved with her name. She traced it with her fingertips, her eyes glimmering. "I never thought I would see this again," she whispered. "I kept it," he said, "not as a trophy, but as a reminder that love, honesty, and integrity are not for sale. They are earned, every single day." She looked at him, the years of pain and distance folding quietly into understanding. "So why invite me here, Adrian?" He took a deep breath. Because there is one thing I never gave you the truth. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring, elegant and unadorned. No contracts, no conditions, no promises written in ink. Only one question, asked with sincerity. Will you marry me? Not for a name, not for protection, but for love? Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was steady. I did not think you still believed in love. I did not, he said. Until you proved me wrong. The gallery was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere in the background. Isabelle took his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Then yes, she said. But only if you promise one thing. Anything. Oh, that you will never forget who you were before you became the man you are now. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I will not. Outside, the city lights of Paris shimmered against the river like 1,000 tiny stars. The two of them stepped onto the terrace, the sound of laughter from the children inside echoing faintly behind them. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger. And in that moment, the story that began with a contract ended with a vow, freely given. As the evening breeze carried the scent of roses and paint, Isabelle leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you still believe money solves everything? She asked. He smiled. No, but love apparently does. And with that, they stood beneath the warm golden glow of the city, no longer bound by paper or pride, only by the quiet, enduring truth that love, once earned, can turn even the coldest heart into light.